wanted to mention one. Oh,
Go
okay,
ahead.
never mind. I heard Joni Mitchell being interviewed by Elton John, and she was talking about the I Ching. And I
Wow.
thought, oh, wow, how cool.
Wow.
And she was describing the characters, and she was actually sounded like she was, knowledgeable about it, because she was talking about the meaning. And I thought, well, who knew?
Right.
No wonder
sure.
why
Sure.
she's becomes, such a famous singer. She has a lot of depth, it appears.
Yeah. No, that's great. So we're going to do another run tonight on what we tried to do last time, and it's considerably different, and as you'll see. So this is the whole point in this is when people ask you what you get out of this class, this is my cut at what you should take away from this. And so, we'll see how it goes. So the first thing we started off with last time was just, we've got our own human physical body, and it has certain traits to it. So the body that we have are made up of these, 50 trillion odd cells, and the cells are all made up of these atoms, and the atoms are the things that appear to be indestructible. And the thing that's unusual about this is that we can think. We have a mind, and we can think. And there's a lot of matter out there that apparently can't think, things like rocks, whatever.
I bet they do.
But I'm willing to bet they think too. And so we have the inorganic materials that make up the body. And the basic cycle is that we have here is you're born, you live for a while, and then you die. And when you die, the body decomposes back into these atoms. And other forms of life seem to follow that. So that this is, I don't think there's anything here that people would object to. So now I'm going to get into things that people will object to. So here we go. We're gonna deal with two different realms here. One is the classical realm. So the classical realm is the realm that we live in, and I'm just dealing here, for example, with mechanics. That's we have the mechanics. Our arms and legs have hinges on them, and muscles and tendons and so forth. And so all of these things operate in some way. And the same theory that we have for describing this describes how stars, spacecraft, galaxies all interact with one another. The same sort of general theory. And the reason why it's called classical or continuous is that if we took a look at say, our body is probably 70% water. And so if we took the water and we divvied it up into, say, pints, we'd have 10, 20 pints of quote unquote water, and they all look the same. They're as we keep chopping it up, it's all continuous. There's nothing funny about this batch of water from that batch of water. So the problems arise here when at the very bottom of this slide, I say around 1900, people realized that there actually was a limit. This is things called atoms. So if we looked at the water that we're talking about, it actually is made up of molecules of 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. And these atoms are in fact discrete. We can't chop them up anymore. Whereas before, when we were talking about water, we could chop it up, we could slice it up in different ways. So it's only when we get down to the very fine-grained area that we start to see something different. But the reason for even bringing this up is that what's at the bottom, what's discrete here, is going to influence what happens when we aggregate all these things together. The most fundamental theory here is going to be the theory of the very small. The word quantum shows up here because it means discrete. It means a part of something. And so this is really the fundamental theory that underlies everything. And as we get away from looking at these atoms, for example, they start to all blend together, and we just start to see a continuum of these things. And so the discreteness appears to wash out, but it's still there all the time. The most fundamental theory is going to be really the discrete or quantum theory that underlies everything. And the thing that makes the quantum world different is that we end up with only discrete values for energies or for different states of these atoms or particles we're dealing with. Whereas in a continuous, we can have water, for example, be at any temperature that we could think of. We could have it raise the temperature up and down. What's the problem? But here, when we actually look at it, there's going to be discrete levels of, in fact, temperature when we look at the water in great detail down at this atomic level. And then another thing that goes with it.
Are you counting it as water when it turns to ice and evaporates as gas?
Well, that's just, those are still aggregations of the water. The water can be in these different phases of solid and liquid and gas, okay? But it's only when we get down to the atomic level, looking at the ice, looking at the gas, that we start to see these things kick in. And so that's what's going to be underlying everything is much as you think that you look at the world around you and it's this continuous world, it really isn't. It's a very discrete world.
Could you kindly define discrete? I mean, you're using that word frequently, and
sure.
Values.
Sure. So as an example, we have space all around us, okay? And space appears to be continuous. When we look at space, as I'm looking around, I don't know, it looks fine to me. But when we go down to a very, very subatomic level, we'll find out that space itself is made up of discrete compartments. So space really makes up a foam, and the foam of all these space compartments rubbing against one another is what collectively makes up what we call space that's all around us.
Discrete means separate.
Yeah,
The spelling of the word discrete means separate. It's not like it's being polite. It's that it's separate in form.
Yeah, the other side is that there are these discrete particles down there. So we know of electrons, for example, and then we have, when we look in the nucleus of the atom, we have protons and neutrons, and the neutrons are made up of an electron and a proton. So then we look at the proton, we see it's made up of these things called quarks, and then we look at the quarks, and they're made up of things called subquarks, and the subquarks appear to be the most fundamental discrete particles that there are, on the same level as an electron. The electron is by itself a discrete particle.
As a photon would be as well, correct?
Yeah, and a photon. Yeah, the difference here is that the particles that we're talking about are these subquarks or electrons. The photons happen to have a different set of characteristics. They're also discrete. So we aggregate enough photons together, we get a stream of light. Okay, but if we just had, one photon at a time hitting us, we wouldn't get a lot of illumination. We need to aggregate them together, and then all we see is a beam of light as they go through the air and light up whatever it is we're trying to light up. So that's what's meant here. So now,
when you're doing a measurement, then, and you're doing it based on discrete values, it sounds like you're going down to a subquark level, or electron or photon level, to find things that are truly discrete.
Yes, that's correct. These are But when we start to aggregate these things together, we start to come up with atoms, and the atoms can form molecules, and the molecules can form the cells that make up our body. So you start to see a hierarchy here. But I'm just focusing on the discrete quantum side as being the most fundamental theory that we have for describing anything. That's what I want to leave you with. We end up dealing many times with a continuous theory, but it's an aggregation of all of these quantum effects that all get smoothed out. The discreteness gets washed away, and you have something that's intrinsically simpler to deal with. So, Steve, does that answer what your question was for now?
Well enough for now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So now we have a different piece of the human body, and presumably this also will have a continuous and a discrete description to it, okay? But we end up having what we would call a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. And the conscious mind is what many people think there's a person that's looking out through your eyes, and they're gathering all of this information. They have the senses of touching, tasting, hearing, seeing, and they're processing all of this information continuously, just creating a lot of yak. And the subconscious mind appears to just manage these automatic functions, such as the breathing of the lungs, taking air in and out, the pumping of blood to and from the heart, things like this. So that's the question here that comes up is, are these things made up of more fundamental particles? This is very much of a classical or continuous description of what's going on. I just want to flag that for you as we go forward.
Bart, I need to throw in a distinction here. When you're saying the subconscious mind is controlling these things, my understanding is you have an autonomic system that controls those things, that the concept of the quote mind, conscious or subconscious, is not what's controlling it, that it's now a mechanical function of the machine that is our body, but our mind does things that are distinctly different than what this autonomic functionality might be.
Yeah, I get your point. What was going through my head when I put this together was I wanted to have a break here between a conscious mind and what I'm going to lead to, which becomes a soul. Okay, and that's why at the last line here I say, at birth, each human physical body is joined to a spiritual body called the soul. And the question is, where does the soul go in all of this stuff? It appears to be, something that might be related to the subconscious. It might be independent of it. And the automatic functions that we're talking about, those take place, whatever.
I just want to insert here that Jung would say unconscious, because some of it, I think, can also be super conscious, not necessarily below consciousness, but, for example, people can control their breathing and blood pressure and so on through various meditation disciplines. They can hold their breath for minutes, and people can learn to do that when they're diving for pearls or all different kinds of things. So they can control the autonomic nervous system through the use of their consciousness, through the use of their mind. I mean, this is something that you see yogis do regularly.
Yeah. No, but Steve has a good point. We should come up with a hierarchy here so that, the conscious mind, we're just going to arbitrarily put at the top. And I'm going to stick I'll put the soul in. I'll put in a unconscious mind underneath the soul. But I'll have to look at this and see. But this is a good point. We'll try and
Can I add something too?
Sure.
So I would add to the conscious mind that it's a stream outside of the person that we tap into. And that's, that we're picking up things that that's passing through or that's here that we can access. That's part of the consciousness, or that, what do they call that? The conscious, like the sort of the overall consciousness.
The collective unconscious.
Collective unconscious. Thank you. The collective unconscious. And I feel like that's also part of what you're talking about.
I think that's a really good point. I think there's the collective consciousness and there's the collective unconscious.
Yes, yeah, right, exactly. I mean, you could, but it would be a really neat, I think it would be a really good chart, because I've never seen that. And I've been, trying to understand these terms for, a while. And I think I would like to see that.
A guru who I've studied with gives what she calls a V diagram. So it's shaped like this. And there's
sure,
like,
yeah.
Strata.
Yep.
To it.
Yeah.
And, the spirit is at the top, and that's above the soul. Actually, the spirit is more collective, is more unified, and then the soul is our individual level, and then consciousness and the personality all come below that.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, Bruce, do you have any comments?
Where to begin?
The thing is that when you start to meditate and you start becoming aware of some of these really profound levels of consciousness, then it's a whole different ballgame altogether. Everything changes to incredible insights and incredible love and compassion and dimensions that most people wouldn't even consider a possibility at all. So it suddenly explodes into a whole different understanding altogether. When you start getting to different levels of awareness in the mind, and you start off just when you're meditating, everything starts to change. You have all kinds of experiences that you had no idea existed and stuff like that.
Sure.
So
I like Cheryl's image of the stream. And a lot of people talk about that you can step into it and step out of it, but that there is this larger or higher level of understanding and knowledge that you can tap into. And I would say creativity also, and Stephen has raised this point, that when you tap into that stream of creativity, you realize it's always there, but we separate ourselves from it. We disconnect. But if you tap in, it's always flowing. It's always, going by. And they say a deadline is your best friend. If you have a deadline, or you give yourself a deadline to produce something, this is something that has been good for me in the past several years of having to do this legal writing. It was a really harsh deadline that I had to meet, and I had to come up with something that I didn't know what it was going to be when I sat down to start it. But as I started studying and learning, I'd say, you know what, this seems like there should be a law about this. And then I would start Googling, which I've realized has become an intuitive process for me, and I would find it. and I would find the laws that I thought should be there, and then I would be able to cite them. But it was through tapping into something larger than my conscious awareness, is like this band, like right here. I think of it as being up here over, even the highest level of my consciousness that I can reach toward and or aspire to. There's more out there that we can call down, or it could be like stepping into a stream that is always passing by, whether we participate in it or not. And that's something that Julia Cameron talks about in her work with creativity, which she sees as an inherently spiritual activity, and process, that it's always there. We don't have to wait to be inspired. Some people are lucky that that happens regularly or all the time. But even if you feel like you don't have that ability, and a good way to do it is meditating. If you reach into that stream, you'll come up with something, some little starfish will come out of nowhere that you hadn't thought of.
Yep. Well, it's kind of like also like, when people riff for creativity, somebody will start something. Like I love to listen to musicians talk about how they start, and somebody will write 3 words down and then they're off to the races. And it's that, again, tapping into that. It also could be thought of maybe as the airwaves too, or the ethers. But yeah, it's something that kind of depicts, like you just said, it's always there.
That we either tap into or we don't tap into.
Right, exactly. But it doesn't turn off.
Right.
There's no off
Right.
button.
Right. That's what
what we
Julia
think.
says. She says it's always there. It may be underground. You may not be aware of it. But if you learn how to quiet yourself regularly, and she has different practices to learn to do that, like 3 pages of free association every morning. It gets by the censor, and the editor.
Mhm.
I was a proofreader. I call myself a recovering proofreader and copy editor, and I was crippled for a while because I just couldn't write a sentence without criticizing it,
Yeah.
So you have to get that out of the way and then bring it back in later, but just to get the raw material to work with, you have to get beyond the shell of your personality, beyond your own skin, into that deeper realm, which and that's why I like the use of the word unconscious, because it's not part of our conscious personality self, and it feels more universal, but it is part of us. We have one strand or one sector that comes into our personal orbit, but it's larger than that also.
Yep.
I'm going to redo this, and I'm going to try and also capture Bruce's idea of non-duality. So there'll be kind of two columns here to capture this.
And I think
we're just piling on, Bart. You're the one that came up with it and started
Well, no,
it.
I put this. That's why I put this out as a straw proposal, because I knew it was incomplete, and I'd rather take the bullets now than later. So,
see, look, your students are getting better now.
Something that Julia Cameron says is, it's creativity when you're surprised by it.
Yeah.
And I really like that. That really works for me as a good definition. When I'm working with clients, at least at one point, usually around halfway through a session, I'm surprised by what's coming out of my own mouth. And lots of times it's really good advice for me that I need to pay attention to. But it's not coming from my conscious personality at all. It's some other, I'm not saying I'm channeling, but it's some other super conscious or unconscious level that
Yep.
we're able to tap into. Okay.
So-
I have a little bit of a different take that I would share. So I kind of to provide a kind of prosaic metaphor here. I start off thinking of like conscious and subconscious sort of as front office, back office kind of thing. So typically, you know, in terms of consciousness, there's just so much resource there in that front office. You know, there might be a lot, but it is limited, you know, to what is there. In the back office, now there can be considerably more, and it may or may not be available. Maybe the back office is closed because it's after hours or something, and you just have difficulty accessing what's back there, and it'll be available when it's available. Independent of that, I think you've got the attic, to me, which is you know, perhaps a dream state. And I think of, okay, well, what is going on in that dream state? I know that for me, it's like a couple of nights ago, I was talking to my wife. She said, how did you sleep last night? And I said, you know, not so well. I was waking up all the time. Well, I was not sleeping so well, but what I was doing was my dream state was alerting my conscious state, waking me up with a song that was being presented to me. So what I do is I write it down or record it right then and there when I'm woken up, because almost 100% of the time, if I don't do that, by the time I wake up in the morning, it's gone, okay? But my conscious state is literally awakened from this dream state, you know, with something that has been produced. And that which is produced to me is also in a different realm. In this case, I think of it as an artistic, creative realm. And for me, that's yet a connection to a higher level, you know, and that is not necessarily, not invariably coming to me from a dream state, but quite frequently it is. It's so frequently that I've actually created a mechanism for me to, you know, write it down or record it, as the case may be, because it happens with enough frequency that I feel that that's an important thing for me to do. Independent of that, I will often, I'll often feel totally limited in my capacities because I can't seem to grab onto anything other than what's in the front office, you know, and then through one mechanism or another, I'll be able to grab onto something in the back office that really helps me to achieve whatever end I'm doing. And these things really seem on a kind of mechanical basis to be segregated, and using Bart's today's favorite word, a discrete level. They seem to be really discrete compartments, you know, and I don't know, I'd have to give it a lot more thoughts to try to fine tune, you know, some metaphor for describing it. But, you know, but the point of the way I've described it was, you know, to you know, kind of use a pedestrian example of how, you know, how my experience is affected by these compartments. You know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
You know,
good.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah, it's great. And you know, it's so interesting because so many people that are in their creative state, that is exactly what happens. You hear it, you know, I hear it a lot, especially in, people talking about how they come up with stuff, and you described it as many people have and then there's some people that have never been able to tap into that. So it's a fascinating, but that's great, Stephen, that you have figured out how to harness that.
Right.
Yeah, Steve,
And I would say it's inherently spiritual, whether.
Yeah. Steve, Paul McCartney woke up and he had this tune running through his head, and he really liked it. And he started asking people, have you ever heard this before? Because sometimes you've just taken somebody else's tune,
Yep.
and you're running with it, okay, and you don't realize it. And so he tried it out on all kinds of people, and he put some words to it, like scrambled eggs and jam or something or other, something totally nonsensical, while he was singing it to different people. And then he rewrote it as the tune Yesterday. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Just such a beautiful melody.
Yeah.
Wow.
The thing about that particular song is it's very hard in 2 minutes to tell a compelling, poignant story. And he did it.
Mm.
So,
I heard recently that Stephen Sondheim said that whenever he writes a song, he finds that a third of the time it's a song that actually came from somewhere else, is someone else's work. A third of the time it was his own work, but previously done. And a third of the time it is in fact something new.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. No.
And sometimes we don't actually have the ability to see the simultaneous poppings of something similar, because we can't tap into that, even though the unconscious can, and God, or however we want to describe that, I'm thinking can, but who knows. But that's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. So this now on this hit, I'm getting into things that there are many people that I know that would say this is highly controversial. So here we're talking about having a soul, and the soul is immortal, and it incarnates into different lives along the way. So you can incarnate into a plant or into a rock, if whatever. But once you end up dying, when the physical body dies, then you go into this bardo, where you review your past life and see what lessons were learned or not learned, and that determines what you should work on in your next life. And apparently there's some entities there, some spirits that are in attendance. They're not critical or whatever. They're just trying to guide the review to point out the different lessons along the way. And so then the soul will reincarnate and will try to achieve higher and higher levels of enlightenment or awareness over time, over lifetime after lifetime. Now, the thing about this, though, is after you've done this plan and you've gone ahead and decided to incarnate, a so-called veil of forgetfulness, or what's called the Maya, it draws down. So you don't remember what it is you're supposed to do. So you end up having the ability to exercise free will, and hopefully by doing this, you will follow the correct path that you will missed in earlier lives. Now, Bruce, what do you think about this?
Start over.
Well, in terms of the Buddhist teaching, it's a lot bigger than one would think about, because in the history of meditation, there's a lot has been shared and learned along the way. And there are some real meditative masters who actually accomplish an incredible level of awareness where all this thing is normal. They have a direct understanding of their own mind as well as anyone else's instantly. Like it's like a whole different realm of reality. So there's a whole lot that the West is missing in terms of understanding the mind. There's a whole lot more to it than one would normally think about at all. But these are all done by meditation masters over a very long period of time. And you know, like for example, just to give you an example, there's 4 levels of what do I call them? Of reality. One is called stream entry, then once returner, no returner, and arahat. Those realities of the mind are very different from one another, and through meditation and practice of meditation, these levels of reality arise on their own. And they're very well documented, they're very well understood. And, you know, whereas in the West, like people say, what on earth are you talking about? But in the East and in Buddhism, it's well known and understood. And you aspire to them. So it makes
Oh, that's good, Bruce. I'll try and go back and research this and include some of those thoughts as well, because you know, this is I'm trying to pitch this all from the point of view of the West, but it's incomplete. That's what I want to keep saying, that you're missing different things.
yeah, absolutely.
I actually thought last week for me was so interesting because I never heard the term Bardo. I didn't know what it was. And then I instantly, as I mentioned, that it conjured up this notion of, well, you know, heaven and hell and purgatory. And there is some kind of a relatedness, perhaps, even though it's expressed differently, but there's, you know, it all sort of talks about the afterlife. And then I heard Jordan Peterson in a lecture this week, and he was talking about being able to do the Bardo in real time every day. And he believes that we might be on the cusp of actually living far longer than we could imagine, because we can take care of our repairing whatever damage we've done to ourselves, our bodies, others, and then we go forward in sort of micro, you know, fixes as opposed to, you know, the end of life, and then we try to hash it all out. And that's why maybe Bruce was saying, oh, you could stay in the Bardo for a long time depending on what kind of life you lived.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I found that these ideas are expanding now, as maybe as a result of the internet helping us all being more aware than just being segregated from the East and the West. And, you know, that's the other thing that I think we're starting to see now as a result of the internet, is these broader thoughts that very few people got to understand prior.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay, no, I'm just want to make sure everyone gets their chance to chime in. So I'm going to plug ahead. I have this thing in there as a placeholder. We have these 7 major chakras, and everything points to the heart chakra, which is in the middle, being really where the action is, and the brain appears to be much more of a computer, of an adjunct to this here. And the takeaway from all this though, is that there's nothing to be feared from death, that the soul retains the knowledge of each of these past lives and the lessons, and this ties the soul to the purpose of life, is the takeaway. And what I'm going to do now is a digression. I touched on this before with this woman, Dolores Cannon, and I have down here at the bottom that she did a lot of hypnosis and regressed people into past lives and was able to get them into a very deep somnambulistic hypnotic state, so that their unconscious, or the unconscious that was there was a linkage to their soul, and that was what they were doing. Is she was asking that person, please go back into an earlier life, and she did that so that she could find something that was causing problems in this life. So many times this led to a cure for these people. So that was why she was doing this. And she decided to give it some buzzword. I have no idea why she picked this quantum healing hypnosis technique, but if you go on the web, you'll actually find literally locally bunches of people that are quantum healing hypnosis service providers. So you can, if you want to, you can go approach them and have them regress you into past lives to see what it is that you did. Okay. The one thing that she flagged in all this was the moment just before you become consciously awake, and the moment before you just fall asleep. It's really that sort of state that she's taking you into, okay, which people normally do. So but she's able to, by hypnotizing you, take you there more quickly and for longer periods of time than just these short windows. One of the problems with this is that when you have people that are in this hypnotic state, that they're presenting things that are, to many people, very strange and inexplicable, and so they kind of get away from it, or you're very open to suggestions. So the hypnotist will make suggestions that will guide you into some direction, but that's not really, you want to just have your unconscious be linked to your soul, to these past lives, and not guided into something that didn't really happen, and so forth. So the point is that there's a lot of evidence. Thousands upon thousands of subjects have gone through this, and people do appear to have these past lives, and they do indeed appear to be progressing. That is, they seem to be getting more and more enlightened and more aware of the true reality around us over many lifetimes. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Well, but that's only true if you believe in time.
Right. Well, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go switch things now to, hold on. Let's see, here it is here. So now we're going to do something which is dealing with, we talked before about these quantum side of things. And here's one of the consequences of the quantum world, as you'll see. Hold on one sec,
The weird rules of the subatomic world are very, very
How can I
different to
get
those
this
of the
thing?
familiar large-scale universe. A huge
Nope.
outstanding question.
Just a sec.
Move the square.
We get this out of the way.
Yeah.
Here we go. This.
Is when
Hold on. I'm just going to start it up now.
The weird rules of the subatomic world are very, very different to those of the familiar large-scale universe. A huge outstanding question is when and why does the weirdness of quantum mechanics give way to classical physics? One answer to this question suggests that the entire universe is so much weirder than we imagined. Or should I say, the multiverse? One of the strangest features of the quantum description of reality is the idea of superposition. We can't describe the most fundamental building blocks of our universe with defined singular properties. Instead, they seem to behave as probability clouds of all properties they might have were we to try to measure them. Mathematically, this is encapsulated in the wave function of a quantum particle or system of particles. The best illustration of why we need to describe the quantum world this way is the famous double-slit experiment. We did an episode on it, check it out if you aren't familiar. But to summarize, a stream of photons or electrons or even molecules travels from some point to a detector screen via a pair of slits. These particles arrive at the screen distributed like the interference pattern you would expect from a simple wave. Quantum mechanics very successfully predicts this result by describing each particle's journey as a superposition of all possible trajectories. In other words, the particle simultaneously takes all possible paths, which means it passes through both slits. It tries out all histories between launch and landing, and those many maybe histories somehow interact with each other to determine the most likely final destination when a measurement is made. In a sense, different possible superposed histories appear to converge on one final outcome. But what causes that convergence? In the original Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, the act of measurement was thought to collapse possibility space into a single reality, at least with respect to the measured property. It collapses the wave function. That collapse signifies the transition between the quantum and classical realms. One of the founders of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, found this ridiculous, and he proposed his famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment to highlight the absurdity. It goes like this. A cat is in a box with a flask of poison. A machine containing a radioactive element is set to shatter the flask in the event that the radioactive element decays. If that happens, the cat dies. That radioactive decay is a purely quantum process, and so until it's observed, it exists in a superposition of states. It has both decayed and not decayed. But doesn't that mean that the entire macroscopic system attached to that quantum event is also in superposition? If so, then the cat should be simultaneously alive and dead until we open the box. But why can't the cat collapse its own wave function? And from its point of view, is the physicist outside also a quantum blur until the box is opened? And what about the entire rest of the universe that's not currently being observed by physicists or cats? Many adherents to Copenhagen now have a more sensible resolution to the paradox of Schrödinger's cat. It's that quantum superposition doesn't extend to macroscopic scales. It disappears when different quantum scale histories diverge. This is called decoherence. When the wave functions describing quantum systems overlap sufficiently, in other words, they are coherent, it's possible to get interference in the double-slit experiment and spookily correlated quantum entanglement measurements. But when these systems interact with their environment, coherence is lost and parallel histories fall out of alignment. They can no longer interact with each other. By the Copenhagen interpretation, we might say that the universe chooses the final outcome of all of those histories. It doesn't exactly choose a single history. Instead, it chooses an end result, say particle location on a screen or cat alive or deadness, based on those histories. If a larger number of possible histories lead to a given result, then it's more likely that the universe will select that outcome. The Copenhagen interpretation says that this selection happens in a fundamentally random way. The universe plays dice, even if the dice are weighted towards certain results. It is what we would call a non-deterministic interpretation because there's no underlying predictability behind the selection. However, there is another way to interpret the transition between the quantum and classical worlds. What if the wave function never collapses? If we can imagine a cat in a superposition of states, alive and dead, why stop at the cat? What if the family of possible states extends beyond the radioactive decay, beyond the cat, and includes the observer, and indeed the entire universe too? If we open the box and find that the cat is alive, it's because we are part of an entire quantum timeline in which the radioactive decay and subsequent poisoning never happened. But there's an equally valid timeline in which it did, and another version of us experiencing that. This sounds outrageous, but it's a very serious interpretation of the mathematics of quantum mechanics. It was proposed by Hugh Everett in his 1957 PhD thesis entitled The Theory of the Universal Wave Function. It's come to be known as the many worlds interpretation. To outline the idea without killing so many cats, let's talk about what this means in the context of the double slit experiment. The Copenhagen interpretation tells us that the superposition of particle trajectories, of histories, merges into the single timeline of the observer's reality. Many worlds says this merging never happens. Those alternative histories continue, and we find ourselves in just one of those timelines. Which one? Well, they're all equally likely, but some look very similar to each other. For example, many histories lead to photons landing on the bright bands of the interference pattern, and very few to the dark bands. We tend to find ourselves in the more common families of histories. This is a pretty crazy notion. The many worlds interpretation invites the idea that reality splits into different branches every time quantum states diverge into different possibilities. For example, at every particle interaction everywhere in the universe. This would lead to an unthinkably large number of alternate timelines or worlds that contain all possible realizations of this universe since the Big Bang. It seems extravagant to propose uncountable, eternally branching universes just to get out of collapsing a wave function. It's like building an entirely new house to avoid doing the dishes. But remember, the Copenhagen interpretation itself proposes multiple worlds in the superposition of paths or properties of a quantum system. Both many worlds and Copenhagen create alternate realities. It's just that Copenhagen merges them into a single timeline with its wave function collapse. The superposition of states of many worlds can be thought of as overlaid histories, slices of a universal wave function that diverge from each other as the universe evolves, but none ever vanish. Many worlds may in fact be the more pure interpretation of the mathematics of quantum mechanics because there's nothing in that math that requires the collapse of the wave function. So many worlds is more economical in the number of unsupported concepts it adds to quantum mechanics, even if it isn't particularly economical in the number of universes it predicts. Now, Everett's idea wasn't taken too seriously when it was first proposed. That may have been in part because he wasn't a well-known physicist. He was just a graduate student who all but disappeared into military research at the Pentagon right after graduation. But another point of resistance must be the overwhelming existential crisis induced by the idea of near-infinite versions of oneself. Many worlds may imply that every possible version of you exists out there. You're just the one who happens to be experiencing this branch of reality. Every other possible life path, including those branching in different directions from every decision you ever made, may be just as real. In fact, each may be real in vast multitudes. There's no more evidence for many worlds than there is for other mainstream interpretations of quantum mechanics. And it is somewhat mainstream these days, with many noted physicists being swayed by its parsimony, its economy of ideas. But it remains an interpretation. And so, although it is supported by the incredibly successful mathematics of quantum mechanics, it has not yet added a prediction that might distinguish it from other equally supported interpretations. Nor is it complete in its explanation. There are some ideas about what's really happening when these neighboring coherent histories interact, or why the wave function translates to probabilities the way it does, but they are far from generally accepted. Unlike Copenhagen, many worlds is a deterministic interpretation. Any given timeline is a predictable chain of cause and effect. It explains the apparent randomness of quantum mechanics with a sort of observer bias. All possibilities are chosen at every junction, and we just happen to be seeing the one that happened in the branch that we occupy. That adds a second possible cause for philosophical unease. In a purely deterministic universe, what happens to free will? If we're going to make all possible decisions anyway, why sweat any given choice? Well, sure, but of all those countless future branches of reality, some are going to be pretty amazing. Think of it as a choose your own adventure and steer this version of you towards one of the more awesome many world branches of space-time. Wow, guys, do you know who this is? This is Diana from Physics School right here on Space-Time. Hey,
It's
Diana.
cool to be in space here.
It's nice, right? One thing I love about your show is all of the crazy, awesome experiments you do. They are so much fun. That thing with the water vortexes blew my mind.
You don't do a lot of experiments on your show.
We could do experiments.
Okay, well then I have a challenge for you. I want to challenge you to prove that the Earth is round using an experiment.
Ooh. How long do I have?
You've got a year, starting now.
Challenge accepted. One thing I really like about Physics School is it explains complex stuff in such understandable ways.
I try.
I'm a kind of jargony kind of guy. I love those long science words, but it's hard to keep track of them sometimes. So I have a challenge for you.
Okay.
I would love you to do an episode in which you explain the 5 most jargony and commonly encountered modern physics words in simple English.
Done.
But I want you to use only the 1,000 most common words in the English language to do that.
That's going to be a little harder.
Yeah.
But challenge accepted. So keep watching PBS Spacetime to make sure that Matt follows up with that challenge.
And keep watching Physics Girl, because we're going to hold you to that, Diana.
Oops, yeah, I gotta turn this off.
There's a whole world out there. Worlds within worlds within worlds.
So there we go. I'm just going to go back here to our, where did, I lost our, here it is here. Okay, so here we have this notion of we have a timeline, and the timeline branches every time there's a change. So I you know, in some I turn left, and some I turn right. Those are again creating different timelines, different worlds that are out there. And all of this collectively makes up this many worlds interpretation, which is the true underlying reality. The non-duality that we're talking about is really captured in this. I actually read this guy's thesis, Hugh Everett, who did all this work. And basically, Hugh Everett was attacked so much that he just dropped out of physics and went into the Defense Department. And no one ever heard from him again about what he was doing there, okay? Because it was just too radical for people to come to grips with, okay?
But notice that the military thought they could make use of it.
Right, they co-opted him. And there's nothing wrong with the mathematics that is lying here. and it just offers you a different view of things, of having, if you will, bunches of timelines that keep branching every time there's a change of any sort. But collectively, you know, a lot of these changes are very small. It just might be, you know, where you know, an electron hops from one energy level to another, and an atom in this timeline and not in the other one. And that doesn't really lead to any huge change in the world around us. Or I you know, take my pencil and I put it on the top shelf of my credenza, and other times I put it on the shelf below it. That doesn't really lead to any huge changes. So a lot of these things are viewed as collectively coalescing, so that there really is one mainstream that's happening here. But then there's a lot of these branches that occur elsewhere. So I want to keep that in mind for a second, and I'm going to go on to the next thing here, which is time, which is we're walking around time. Okay, so to try and tie these things together, when we kept dealing with space-time, we always had 4 coordinates, 3 for space, X, Y, and Z. And then we had time, but time isn't anything as a measure of length. So we multiplied it by the speed of light. The speed of light is length per unit time. So now we have a length, but we have to multiply it by the square root of -1. So time is different here when we're dealing with this sort of stuff, just to start with. And when we go back to this person, Dolores Cannon, who did these thousands of sessions with people over decades, she actually had some students. She had some people. I believe there were 4 of them, and they, in past lives, were all students of Nostradamus. Now, Nostradamus lived from roughly 1500 to 1560 and was a physician in, I think, Avignon and Provence. But he also was able to, ended up, you know, predicting a variety of things. And he wrote roughly 1,000 quatrains that were very, very obscure in how he wrote them. These quatrains, because in the time that Nostradamus was living, the Catholic Church had the Inquisition going full blast. And if there was anything that the Inquisition didn't like, it was not going to be good for you. So he wrote these quatrains in a very obscure way. And in the course of Dolores Cannon dealing with these students of Nostradamus, Nostradamus picked up that Dolores Cannon was there actually interacting from 1980 with these students back in 1530. And all of a sudden, Nostradamus started to talk to the student, who in turn talked to Dolores Cannon. Remember, the student is hypnotized. Some of these are women. The students that Nostradamus had were all men. And so he started talking to Dolores Cannon, and he asked her, please go out and get a copy of his quatrains. And they went through something like 500 of them that were very obscurely written. And he clarified, he explained to Dolores Cannon exactly what each of these quatrains was really saying, that he couldn't write because the Inquisition was going to come after him, and that was going to be the end of it. Now, having done all that, remember, he's doing this at the same time, okay? So if you actually look in some writings there that were associated with Nostradamus, he said that he actually talked to people in the future. And what he was really saying was, I want to show you, a different set of futures that might happen. And some of these are really terrible, absolutely terrible things are happening. And you want to avoid these. And by me showing you these things, I hope you'll be scared enough you'll go out of your way to make sure that these futures don't happen. That's the tie-in back to this many worlds side of things that we're talking about here. So in one of the quatrains, he actually wrote that Pope John Paul II, who was shot in one of the original quatrains, he was actually assassinated. And that got changed in the world that we're in. He wasn't assassinated, he was shot and he recovered. But then what Nostradamus wrote was that the church was going to implode from within. And I think, you know, we can see that today. We can see that the attendance in the church is dropping. And in part, it's also because of all the different things that have come to light in terms of transparency for what the church has actually done. And it's turned people off and turned people away from the church, which would have been impossible for him to say back in the 1530s, 1540s, etc. But the fact that he Nostradamus actually talked at the same time, 1530 to 1985, is mind-boggling. It just shows you how different time is from all of these dimensions that we're talking about here. There's a different example which you'll find on
I
the
don't
web.
think we have a clue what it is, but all I can
Right.
say is I don't think it's what we're
Oh,
talking.
I agree. There's a different
Small.
example on the web. You'll find this where there were tens of subjects that had gone through this hypnotic regression to past lives, and they had all lived through the Civil War, and they all believed that the South had won. It defeated the North in the Civil War. But in fact, that evidently some third party started going out there in 1862 and really started messing up the South. And the South started to lose battle after battle at that point in time, with the turning point being Gettysburg. And so we have a different timeline than the one that these people actually remembered here.
And some people think it still happened,
Well, that it's what?
but some people still think the South won the war.
Oh, yeah, no, that's absolutely true, you know.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
They all happen to be in the South, right?
Absolutely.
Mostly, I would say mostly.
Yeah. So we have these different, things, but underlying it all, you can see this non-duality that Bruce has talked about, or this universal wave function that captures kind of everything that's in the universe, even though it's branching all the time. If we follow this many worlds is again completely consistent with quantum mechanics. It's just the interpretation of what you see there.
Yes, and it's kind of like what, what's his name, Zuckerberg is doing with Metaverse.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
pulling on that. He's,
Yeah.
grabbing a piece of that.
Right. So these are things to keep in mind. And this takes us back now to this, to try and capture all this. So why are we doing this? And apparently what's going on here is that people live to learn how to achieve awareness or an enlightenment or unity with the collective consciousness or unconsciousness that underlies everything. And the problem is that it takes a while to achieve this. In order to do this, you have to go through life after life, and it's very difficult for the soul to do this on its own. It can learn much better by incarnating into a body and living a life, and then it has the free will in each of these lives that it can go through. But it's always trying to advance, to achieve these higher levels. And there's certain teachers such as the Buddha or Jesus of Nazareth or Isaac Luria, who was the Kabbalist in the 1300s, 1400s, something like that, that achieved this level of enlightenment in their lifetime. And they chose to try and teach others or guide others in their footsteps to more quickly advance to achieve these things. So this may or may not be correct, but it appears to be, reasonable. And that takes us to meditation, okay, where here we're taking the action of linking the human mind with the spiritual side of life. So we're linking with the soul here that's linked to this body. And the mind that we're talking about here is what? It's going to be this thing that's close to the collective unconscious, not the conscious mind, but the unconscious mind that's here. And so the point in this meditation is that not only will this achieve this linkage, but it'll lead to higher levels of compassion and love for others and for oneself. Incredible emotions, incredible thoughts that come with this. And the nature of the duality between the mind or the conscious part of the human body and the spiritual soul is that meditation will lead you to the realization that there's really a non-duality, and that only the reality, there's one reality out there, and it's that the soul or the spirit sees that is really the valid reality, and it's far more nuanced, far more complex than anything that if you just kept with your conscious mind, what you would really think is going on. But again, the picture is always that of the conscious mind is in a movie, and you're running around in the movie. And in fact, when you achieve non-duality, you're now sitting out in the audience and can see the whole world around you. And in particular, you can see that you're just running around, acting in this movie, but that's a small part of what's really going on. You're missing out on the true richness of the reality that's all around you. So here's the idea of this movie. Just trying to think what else there is here. The other thing is that the self doesn't exist. When you actually have this realization here, in fact, that's the real experience. When you have it, because the self is gone. And we spent some time touching on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which he deals with meditation. Bruce came up with, there's an online, we read a book last summer by Phakchok Rinpoche on, what was it called? Essential
Happiness.
Radical,
Practical happiness.
Yeah, practical happiness, right.
no, radical happiness.
Radical happiness, right. We'll get it right. And so now he has an online class, if you want that as well, which will, it's got 40 odd lessons to it. Now this gets us off into this area of sacred geometry. And here, I'm the one that likes this, so but I'm going to skip over this as much as I can. So last time I just talked about how, that after 500 years of study, only 5% of the mass or energy in the universe has really been under study, and the rest of it isn't studied. And so if we're in three...
How do they even quantify that?
Well, that's what I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay, is that the first thing that's missing is when people looked at the galaxies out there, and this was only possible in the 20th century with telescopes, that they saw things that they thought were just nebulae or just clusters of stars. And then they realized that they're actually full galaxies that were hundreds of millions of billions of light years away. So they when they looked at these things spinning, then they plugged in some estimates for how much the mass of the stars was, and they realized that if they were spinning, that everything would fly apart unless there was more mass there, like a lot more mass. At least 20. This is 27% of the universe, and the mass they're talking about is only 5%. So it's 5 times as much of the mass in these galaxies is dark. You can't see it. It's transparent. That in order for the galaxies as they spin to just be spinning galaxies, and
That needs to be as attracted.
right to
together.
keep them not flying apart, and that was only part of the story. The other part was that these stars are all and the galaxies are all moving away from one another, and that's driven by what is called simply dark energy. No one knows what it is, but the space itself is expanding. Not that things are moving, but the space itself is expanding. And so if that's happening, then everything is moving away from everything else. And that's, if I just took 27% and 68% here, the dark energy is, 2.5 times greater than just the dark matter. And so this adds up to 95% of what we can't see, dark energy and dark matter. And rest assured, there's a lot of people that are going crazy, trying to figure out what's going on here.
Bart, this is quantified because of gravitational forces?
Yeah, gravitation and for the dark matter and the galaxies moving apart, the dark energy. Hold on one sec. Yeah, is it anything quick? I'm just in class still.
Okay, then why don't you send it over to me then, but whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'll give you a call. Okay.
But
so the telescopes were able to start to look at how fast these things were moving apart from one another. And again, they plugged in estimates, for how big are, the masses of these galaxies. They have so many stars per galaxy. The stars have so much mass. And that's where these numbers all came from. They're all estimates, which are, subject to ongoing revision.
But the whole premise is based upon conjecture that
Well, no, these are measurements. These are, they're seeing it's working hypotheses, okay, and they're simply saying that if we see spinning galaxies, that they just normally fly apart unless there's more mass there that we can't see, or there's the stars and galaxies are all moving away from one another. And the energy required to do that is phenomenal. And that's why that's the 68% of the energy mass in the universe is caught up there.
Bart, let me just pose a question to you here. So listening to this strikes me that this theory of how it all fits together, very well might be how it is. But as an alternative, if you don't, I'm not sure if classical physics, is that the same as Newtonian physics? Is what how?
Yeah, classical and Newtonian are the same. Yeah.
Okay, so we are using a formulaic relationships predicated on Newtonian physics, and so based upon that, we're observing what's going on, and using those formulas we have, the only explanation that will allow things to work is to fabricate, pardon the pun, out of thin air, that there is such a thing as dark matter. And if there is such a thing as dark matter, now our formulas work. But this is simply saying, this is presuming that Newtonian physics is what's at play. What
Right.
actually might be at play is a physical reality that nobody has ever dreamt of,
That's
but
correct.
we're creating formulas based upon, the structure that we know, and we're kind of forcing it all in. I have a related question for you regarding the square root of -1. Is there a short-term word for it that would be analogous, say, to the word pi, that they call that?
What they call the square root.
Same way that you would say, pi r squared is
Yeah.
a way of abbreviating an equation. Is
Right.
there a word that is used in lieu of the square root of -1?
Just I, the letter I for imaginary.
Imaginary. Okay. So I personally would choose bullshit, so you multiply, and this times that doesn't work, but if you add in bullshit, now it works.
Right. No, you're entirely correct, Steve. It could be that there's a totally different theory here that hasn't been uncovered. We're coming at it from the point of view of what Newton did, and then what Einstein did, and people, and remember, I talked about these are all, if you will, classical theories that work on the very large scale, but we said that the real underlying theory is quantum. It's based, it has to start on the micro scale, on the scale of space itself, and work its way up to result in a classical theory. So, people are going crazy trying to do this. I'm just trying to argue here that if we have 3 spatial dimensions around us, and that has 5% or 1/20th of all of the mass and energy that we can see, then 3 divided by 1/20th means we need 60 dimensions, and the other 57 dimensions are the ones holding all of this dark matter and dark energy, because that's where the bulk of the action is.
Well, since I literally have no clue, pardon me, I'm just being a troublemaker, so excuse
No,
me.
no one knows. This is, I'm just giving you the the pitch for why there should be more dimensions. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say here. Simply because if things are all vibrating, if you really believe that mass and energy are really just vibrations, then where are they vibrating? They're not doing it in the 3 dimensions around us, because we don't see them.
But Bart's also saying he's not the one making this up.
Right. So
I get that.
It's a piece of deductive reasoning to arrive at it, which may or may not be reasonable, but he's not the one inventing it.
No, he's fascinated by it. It's captured his imagination, and he's intrigued, and so he keeps looking at it and he keeps learning about it. And I think the other thing too that we have to, did we talk about this last week, where people are suggesting that maybe the pyramids were made by vibrations from like chanting, singing.
The pyramids themselves allow you to resonate in a certain way. Okay, they support certain sorts of vibrations naturally. They're natural modes for the pyramids.
And they think that that's how they were able to move them and do all this precision. It was more, working in a different dimension than what we're aware of, and civilization is perhaps forgotten. And that's the other part. We always have to remember that different times people were doing things we can't understand yet.
Right. Yeah, we don't know. For example, what the Great Pyramid does. It clearly is not a burial chamber. So what was it? but
Yeah, well,
that's
that too.
that's it.
That's another good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Well, there's always these questions like, how did they move these massive stones, be it building
Yeah.
the pyramids or Stonehenge or these things? And, perhaps it's just simple levitation, it's not a big deal at all.
Well, for
Right.
the people that did it, they probably thought it was a piece of cake.
Right.
Once they figured it out. But who knows how many people it took, and to get that energy or access. It's all. The more I learn about this stuff, the more I see how little we really understand.
Right.
But yeah, we have clues. We have clues.
Yeah.
It seems that a lot of the cathedrals in Europe and the pyramids in the Middle East were designed as some kind of reflex chamber,
Yeah.
that there's something in the geometry of them that translates into sacred geometry that does something to energy and vibration.
Yeah. This is really what Ron Cowan and I did together, was coming up with this 26 real dimensions here. And the key thing is that there's 8 subspaces of 3 spatial dimensions each, or each of the 8 subspaces is paired. One is all real, and the other one is all imaginary. You could think of it as rotated 90 degrees away from the first one. So there's really 4 subspaces, but they have 3 complex dimensions each, not 3 real dimensions. Okay. And so it leads to, the pictures like we've got here. The thing to take away from it is besides all of this order here, there appears to be a linkage, because we keep coming across this number 8 with this set of numbers called the octonians, and the octonians themselves are all linked to these special symmetry groups called exceptional Lie groups. And so it goes. And then a lot of the vibrations that occur can occur there's this a so-called monster group that has 196
Clear your throat.
196,884 dimensions. And that leads to the chance for all kinds of energy to be stored in these other dimensions that are that apparently are in between the 3 dimensions that we're talking about in each of these subspaces. So there's a whole story here of what else is going on, but the main thing is, it appears to be the geometry is a natural way to describe it, and that the geometry leads to a natural arena for where all these things take place. So matter is in this green thing here, dark matter is in this red thing here, and the things that are down here at the bottom are really higher order. They're very spiritual, very ethereal actions here, and who knows what's going on in those things with entities that are not necessarily matter, but they're energy, and they just vibrate. You've seen, if you look at people trying to describe angels or whatnot, they describe them as being beings of light, that they're just encompassed in light, and so it goes. The only thing that I would flag here is there are these holes that connect. There's 3 holes.
I have the Calabi-Yau manifold.
Yeah, I understand. I'm going to put it in. We have 3 holes for the matter, 4 holes for the dark matter, and 8 holes for this thing at the bottom, which is all in yellow. And if you look at these, we have a trinity, which is these 3 Calabi-Yau manifolds here, all at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, which apparently was what was sensed as a trinity, so-called Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a different thing was connecting all the holes together. There's 8 holes, there's 18 dimensions, but with the 8 holes, there's really only 10 independent dimensions. And that matches the tree of life, which has 10.
What did you do to the word Kabbalah?
It got butchered. I gotta go run this through spell checker. So there's that.
So how did these, what defines independent dimensions, and how do you magically subtract 8 to get to the 10?
Because if I have one dimension that's linked to another dimension through a hole, there's a hole here and there's a hole here. Okay, so if I link,
Remember the image of the Calabi-Yau manifold? It looks almost like an amoeba or something.
yeah, if I link two dimensions together through a hole, I only have one dimension.
And they're all kind of like, Möbius strips, the way they.
Well, they're all.
What if you have half a hole?
What is what?
What if,
What if they're linked through half a hole?
half a hole?
Half a hole? There is no such thing. It's
Are
a
you
bagel
sure?
that didn't make it. It's a donut. It's a defective donut.
Purgatory.
So anyway, that was a suggestion that this might be more right than wrong, but who knows?
Do you have an image handy of the Calabi-Yau?
No, not. I mean, I have to go to the website. I don't have the website up. In fact, let me just look and see.
It should always be.
Oh, here it is. Here. Okay, here we go.
There's one right
Wait.
there at the top
I know. Let me get
with the holes that you can see the background through. So that helps make it larger.
So here's. No, nothing happened. Here's a Calabi-Yau manifold, which is a 2-dimensional slice of one of these 6-dimensional, but you can see there's holes there in this thing. Okay. So and this is, you have to remember, these things are vibrating. I'm talking about these dimensions, but the dimensions themselves are vibrating. Okay. There's a real ballet taking place here. So anyway, that was, let me just go back to presentation.
So Bart, how many holes are there in this manifold?
There's a total of 8 holes. There's a total of 8 holes. We have 18 dimensions, so there's really only 10 independent dimensions.
How many holes are there in the theory?
How many holes in the theory? Well, since there's no theory, there's no holes. So let's see, let me try and advance this thing. The other thing to keep in mind is just this notion of interaction between the physical and spiritual parts. So here we have all of this noise taking place in the brain, in the mind, and all of these things vibrating all over the place at all levels. And so trying to meditate, you have to calm all this down and ignore all these distractions before you can actually achieve any sort of non-duality, before you can get rid of all of the distractions that are taking place everywhere.
Well, and I think the biggest illusion of duality is the notion of inner and outer.
Right. Right. Now, the Ron Cowan observed that these dark matter forms, when we talked about them being out in these galaxies, okay, and he looked out there and he saw that they were forming these tubes that were literally, hundreds of thousands of kilometers long, but they were all inert. There wasn't any energy there. They were just mass. They were just sitting there. But if they landed on something where they could couple to the energy, some vibrational energy, like they landed on a star, or they landed on the planet Earth, which was warm. So then they'd start to pick up this energy, and then they wouldn't be simply inert. They would become alive, and would end up becoming much more active in what was going on. So there are these two different states here that he came up with for this dark matter. One is inert, and one is active. But you need some energy to become active here. Then we had examples of sacred geometry. We touched on these pyramids that are all over the planet, everywhere. For example, you find pyramids in Scandinavia all over the place. You find these in India. They're not pyramids. They're these other things that kind of look like onions, onion-shaped things that are all over the place there. And the Greeks got all caught up in this because of the fact there's a small number of so-called Platonic solids and Platonic two-dimensional figures that are all perfectly regular, and that means that they were singled out, that maybe there's something special about them, that they have special properties. Christianity has always used the symbol of the cross, many different variations on that. In the Kabbalah, you had these elements of fire, water, air, and earth that were captured here in the 10 nodes of the tree of life, the 10 Sephiroth. The native shaman relied on circles or prayer wheels there. We find labyrinths all over the place in all ages, and we find these stone circles in Stonehenge, in Avebury, Newgrange, Karnak in Brittany, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. But there's many, many more examples of these stone circles. So there's all kinds of examples of this. They must be there for a reason. There must be something where they attract energy, where things happen. And then that leads us off into the end here, which was what Cheryl and Barbara covered, which was the pristine mind. And I think I'm just going to end it here, because I liked some of the figures that Cheryl came up with of, when you talked about distractions, here's some distractions that'll really, keep your mind going night and day. And, the other side of things that Bruce has always stressed is that the idea of having this compassion and true love leads to something that's far richer and far beyond anything that just the conscious mind begins to experience. Okay, that this is truly something that's aligned with reality, with what we might call the universal wave function. There's no distortions occurring due to any of the noise that's happening. And the perfection that we're achieving here is our entire experience of the world around us. We're sensing the true reality, not what you might think is the reality here. And again, more distractions, all kinds of examples here. I just thought it was a nice picture. And so the need to meditate as a daily practice is one thing to take away from this. And the awareness that you come up with is, is incredible. Bruce had cited having some exceptional teachers here or gurus that he was able to link with, and that led to speeding up the educational process and being able to achieve greater things than you might have if you didn't have such a guru there. But the thing is to keep in mind here, the self disappears as if the self never existed in the first place. And when the self disappears, so does all the other stuff. And so you're in a natural state of union with the universe around you, with everything, but in a far richer context. And the four negative emotions of anger, resentment, hypercriticism, and guilt are just gone. You don't have these anymore. You're at ease. You're aware. You're enlightened, and so we close with this picture. So we'll do another rev on this thing. I don't know if we'll do it as a class, but we'll see what happens. And with that, I wish everybody happy Thanksgiving.
You guys too. Safe travels to Lewisburg.
And thanks for all the great comments too. And they're all very constructive. Nothing's personal. You can see how little we know by
All of us.
going through this stuff. How anybody that thinks that they know what's going on, I beg to differ.
I'd like to share something I wrote recently that I think relates to the earlier part of this discussion. It was about art. And what I wrote is sometimes we'll say something or do something or experience something that seems by the hands of providence to elevate our consciousness and bind us to the essence of a higher power in a spiritual association to which we all belong. That's how we create and engage with art in any of its myriad and wondrous forms.
Wow.
It's just
Well said.
That's beautiful.
That's well said.
Send that to us in an email.
Yeah,
We'll quote you. We'll put it on the website.
that's very nice, Steve.
If that's okay with you.
But I also was curious if you've ever listened to Sadhguru. You ever heard of him or listened to him?
I have.
Anybody? Sadhguru?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's in Iowa. Yeah.
One of the things that I heard him say that I really thought was fascinating in terms of the brain being what we construe as the most intelligent organ in our bodies that guides all these things. He said, think about what the rest of the body is doing, in that it is smart enough that it can ingest whatever it ingests in the broad category called food and change that into a human being, and so that how smart does it have to be able to achieve that? So it started out as being corn and now it's a human being. This is a real metamorphosis, and it requires intelligence to do that. No.
He says that a lot, actually, Stephen. I haven't listened to him lately, but I listened to him a lot in the early days of the pandemic, like all the time. And he's an interesting guy.
Right. I think he's also very funny.
He's very funny. And it's fascinating how he got his education. He went to college, but he didn't go to college. He just went to the library and read every book he could read. And he was complying with his parents, but he just couldn't sit in the classroom. So he just would go and read all these books. And It's really, he's an interesting person.
You know, all those videos he has on YouTube,
Mhm.
he has, none of them are scripted. He just takes the microphone and he starts talking. There's
Well, maybe we
there's
should-
no preparation.
Steve, would you like to introduce him to us in a class?
No, it sounds like you all know him better than I do. I just have randomly.
I've never encountered him, I don't think.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I skipped over him, but you've heard him. Yeah.
Well,
You know,
It would be
I-
good, Stephen. That might be a good thing.
I wouldn't know how to begin to introduce him beyond what I've just said. That I think he's an interesting, funny dude. You know, he's just quite a character. You know, and so.
well, you could just the way Cheryl and Mark did, just curate a couple of videos from him, or images, or a few sound bites, and put together. Maybe you could work with somebody, but that might be fun.
Well, I'll try to pay attention to noting any individual things I've heard him say to be able to see if I could do that. I just randomly see his stuff, and if I have a few minutes, I'll listen to it. That's pretty much my exposure. So.
Right.
Well, you could research.
Yeah.
It's a good rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna run. So everybody have a wonderful
right.
holiday, and
Thank you all. We're
we'll see you
grateful
next
to
week.
You're on our gratitude list.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thank
you
you.
too. You too.
Thanksgiving is all about.
Bye-bye.